So in this video, we're going to talk about the basics of the biped rigging system inside 3dsMax and the pros and cons to it. Now, this is going to be kind of like a multi-piece video, so kind of just work with me here. So I've got this character inside my scene. I would like to rig it. A lot of times in production, you cannot spend time building a full custom rig. You might not also have like a technical artist or technical lead on your team who can prepare that custom rig for you. So a lot of 3D packages will have pre-made rigs that you can use, or pre-made rigging systems. 3dsMax has the biped system. Now the biped system, it's been around for years. There's a lot of pros with it, there's a lot of cons with it. So I always make sure that everyone's aware of those. Again, this tool can be very, very helpful in production. I use it all the time for different characters. I even use it for quadrupeds as well at times. Again, if you don't have the time to build the custom rig, this is a great tool for you to use. So in order for you to create a biped, you're going to go to your Create tab, and then you're looking for the little Systems tab, again, two little gears, and then we're looking for biped. I'm just simply going to click and then drag and create a biped here. So what I'm clicking and dragging out is my system here, right? This is my rigging system. And inside that rigging system, there's a number of different features. Now, inside the features, where one of the first things we need to do before we even go into the features is I need to center my biped to my grid, right? When you're working with character animation, you always want to make sure, or character rigging, I should say first, you always want to be working from the center of your grid so that way you can utilize mirror parameters that are available to you with the rigging software. Right, or the rigging package, sorry. So I've got my biped here. Again, I've just simply centered it. However, I now need to enter something called figure mode. So I'm actually going into my motion tab here, top right hand corner, and I'm looking for this little stick man here for figure mode. So inside figure mode, what you're doing first is you're centering this to your grid, right? You're centering what's called the bip. This bip here, again, this little bone object in the center of the biped, this is essentially your weight shift control, right? So if I want to have my character squat up and down or move positionally, it's going to happen from that bip. You can notice you also have a hip bone over top of that. Now, once I've centered it to my grid here, the next thing we're looking at is the overall structure. So you're not placing your bones until you have an accurate structure based on your character. You can see here with my character, I have kind of like a webbed setup in the topology. Again, this is very common for mobile games. Typically, you don't need the full dexterity of all the different fingers, and you need to optimize your game, right? So you're not going to use all those tries to create all those individual fingers unless you really need that type of movement. For this character here, you can see it's rather low poly. It's catered to mobile. I simply have an index finger available to me where I could go in and still do like pointed like poses in the hand if I wanted to. So you can see in my biped here, I've actually gone in and I have a structure in the bones that is accurate as to what I see in my character's hand. Now, in order for me to change this, off to the right side of our screen inside figure mode, you've got a structure column here, and typically this is actually going to be closed up. Inside structure, there's a number of different things you can change. Again, you're doing all of these changes before you start placing your bones in the geometry of your character. So you can see first thing we've got here is body type. So I can actually just simply change the overall display of my biped. This does not change functionality. Again, this is solely just display. I typically work just simply with classic. This is what I first learned a number of years ago. I use it with all of my students. It's just an easy way of using the biped. Again, whatever option you choose, it's totally up to you. They all work the same. Now down below you have all these different structure options. Again, you can see as we go through these, they're corresponding to different things, right? So I can make a bunch of spine bones if I wanted to. I can make a bunch of neck links if I wanted to. And really we can go in and customize this based on whatever our character's anatomy is, right? So we can use this for human characters. We can also use this for different creatures or quadrupeds, whatever it might be, right? So it's rather versatile in that sense. Now, a number of different things that we can do as well here is we can go in, but we can also start resizing some of these bones. Now, we typically don't start resizing these bones until we're happy with the overall structure of our biped. So what I've done here is I've taken one toe and I've just simply kind of scaled it up. Again, this is, I'm not, really looking overall at the placement just yet. I'm just trying to get my biped kind of, pieced together here. You can see I have a toe change on one foot. I would like to replicate that on the opposite side. Again, this is really nice, a nice feature that the biped has, where you can actually go in and just simply copy and paste features from one leg over to the next. So this is great for rigging. It's also great for animation. So in order for me to do this, I'm just going to go over to the right side. I'm looking for copy paste here, and inside copy paste, by default, you probably will not have something called a collection created. So you will have to create a collection just by simply clicking on this create collection button here. You can see I just made a brand new one. Think of the collection as a folder, okay, and the folder is going to be holding all of these poses that we're going to be saving, we're going to be copying and pasting. Okay, so now that I've created a new collection, down below, just below the posture button, we have an option here for copy posture. Right, so I'm going to go ahead and click on copy posture. You're going to see we got this little thumbnail preview of the bone we have selected, and then we're going to click on paste posture opposite, and you're going to see that's going to replicate on the opposite side of the character. So once I'm happy with the overall structure of the biped, then I can start going in and actually placing my biped. So when I'm placing my biped, the first thing we're thinking about is the center of gravity. Again, this bip here is acting as our center of gravity. Think of it if, again, if I want to squat my character or move my character around, it's all going to happen from this hip, or sorry, the bip. So I'm taking my bip here, I'm just kind of placing it. Then I'm just going to scale up my hips just a touch here. I might actually lower this down a little bit. Scale out my hips, and I'm going to start working my way down the leg here, and I'm only working on one leg at a time. There's no sense for me to work on both legs here, because again, I'm just going to be simply copying and pasting the features over to the opposite leg. So I'm just going to grab these two bones. I like to kind of scale them down a decent amount here so they actually fit within the geometry. It doesn't matter if the bone is sticking out of the geometry. Ultimately, what matters is the pivot points, right? It's the pivot points of these bones, or the pivot points of the different joints. And you can see what I'm doing here is I'm trying to line up this knee joint here with the edge loops in and around the knee. Again, typically what I say to my students is this edge loop kind of going through the middle of the joint. That's what we call our 50% edge loop. And the reason why I call it a 50% edge loop is because 50% of the influence of that middle edge typically is going to be weighed onto the calf, 50% is going to be weighed onto the thigh. We then have these additional vertices here that are a little bit higher on the thigh, some are a little bit lower or high on the calf. They would still have a little bit of influence from the bone above it. However, it's still going to be a little bit more heavily prioritized onto the bone that it's simply sitting over top of. This 50% edge loop theory can be used for everything, right? So thinking about fingers, shoulders, elbows, it doesn't matter what character or creature you're working on, right? Just rigging in general. If I have two bones meeting along an edge loop, right, or at an edge loop, I should say, if I'm blocking in my skinning, I'm always going to take those vertices and I'm going to weigh them 50% onto each of those bones, just because they're kind of sharing that space. So I'm just continuing my way down here. Again, kind of looking for these 50% edge loops so I can see one in and around the ankle, right? That's where I want to try and set up my target here. Now, with the biped foot as well, sometimes, and just biped bones in general, sometimes you can't get it fit perfectly into your character, and that's kind of just the reality of using the biped. There's only so much we can really do. So that is one potential con with the biped system. Again, custom bones, you typically have a little bit more control of the placement of those bones, the shape of the bones, whatnot. I mean, you could do a variety of different things with the biped. However, you do have a little, more manipulation, more modification and customization with custom bones. So you can see I'm really just kind of moving my toe into place here. Now, I'm doing that, but I shouldn't have done that because I will have to change this ankle position here, and I will do that at the start of the next little. Well, a great feature with the biped, and one thing we want to be able to do with the biped is the biped has things called sliding keys, which allow you to actually pivot the foot on the ground. And when you're pivoting the foot on the ground, it's pivoting from different positions, and you can customize those, or not customize those positions, but you can choose those different positions based on the bottom of the actual biped bone itself. So we want to try our best to get the heel of the foot bone lined up with the heel of our geometry to the best of our ability, and sometimes with certain characters, that's really not possible. Again, pros and cons, right? Always thinking about those. So we have this feature here off to the right. You just noticed I was kind of moving around my ankle. There's a feature called ankle attach. Again, this is inside the structure column here, still within our figure mode right now. Again, all of this is happening inside our figure mode. You're in figure mode until you have the bones placed, right, for the entirety of your character. Once you start animating, then you turn off figure mode. So you can see I'm just playing around with this ankle attach feature here, and I'm really just trying my best, again, trying my best to get that foot bone kind of aligned a little bit better with my character. Again, there's really, you know, a lot of times you kind of have to find some sort of average point through the leg. Very rarely are you going to have every single joint perfect, so to speak. Right, so again, I'm just kind of moving things around here. I might actually want to scale this back just a touch and kind of go back and forth between the ankle attach feature and the scaling of your foot bone. It's, again, a little bit of a pain, but you know, it is what it is. So again, just trying my best to get this positioned here. Do a little bit more. Okay, and then again, my toes here, very rarely are you going to work on characters that have individual toe bones. Typically, you're just going to use some sort of like small little paddle almost for the toes. So you can see I've got my right leg here roughly placed. Again, I'm doing this at a decent pace. I don't want to, you know, make the video too long, so you can see my thigh could probably be placed a little bit better, but that's okay. So I'm done with my, you know, right leg. I would like to actually copy that over to the opposite side of my character here. So I'm actually double clicking on my thigh, right? That's going to select all of the children of that thigh bone, which is our calf, foot, and toe. And we're going to go over to our copy paste features again, and we'll do the exact same thing here. Now that we have a collection created, I don't have to copy the pose at this point, right? So I'm just simply going to click on copy posture. Again, we can see all of those bones highlighted in red here in this small little preview. And I'll hit paste posture opposite, and you can see that my left leg has just simply snapped into place, right? So continuing our way up the body here, what we can do typically when I'm working on my thighs, or not my thighs, sorry, my torso, I'm going to take my bicep and actually just kind of move these out away from the body here, because they're really not important currently. We're looking at the torso. You could even go as far as taking the clavicles and really just tossing them aside. Again, we'll grab these eventually and pull them back towards the character. For right now, it doesn't matter. So for the torso, typically what I'm looking for here is I'm really just trying to split this up into two pieces. I usually only use 2 spine lengths for the majority of the characters I work on. However, the higher the density, sometimes it actually, you know, is warranting an additional spine bone. I'll never go past 3, though. It's super rare for me to go past 3. Typically what I'm looking for is I'm just looking for the division of the lower torso with the upper torso. So kind of like your abdominal region and your chest, right? So I'm actually just looking at this in different views. I'm actually just going to rotate this lower torso bone forward a little bit, arc the spine back a bit, just to kind of replicate what I'm seeing in my overall silhouette here. And I'll extend the chest up a bunch here, kind of like so. And then we can look at the neck bone here. The neck bone, typically I want to start my neck bone at the base of the neck, right? So looking at my character, again, the lower the topology, the easier it is for you to find these areas. You can see I'm, again, looking at the silhouette of my character's neck, right? The silhouette is helping me with the overall alignment of this bone. And I'm placing this neck bone and I'm stopping it at the base of the head. Again, we can see where we want to have that head kind of tilt around. So I'm just going to kind of scale up this head bone just a little bit here. Might actually bring this down a bit. All right, so we've got our torso set up here. We've got our neck. We've got our head. All right, so I've got my torso pieces placed. I'm now grabbing the clavicle, and I'm going to move this over. And typically with clavicle bones, I'm really just trying to get this rather snug up and around the base of the neck here. And we want to extend this out Typically on characters, you're going to have some sort of an edge loop in and around the armpit. Again, if you look at your clothing, if you're wearing a t-shirt right now, you're going to have that seam in and around that armpit typically. Again, more common clothing, of course. That edge loop is kind of like our target point for the beginning of our bicep bone. So you can see right now, I'm actually just taking my clavicle. I'm just going to bring down the size of all of these here as well. Very similar to what I did with my legs, just so it's a little bit easier for me to work with. And that clavicle bone, again, notice I'm orbiting around all different views. I'm not just looking at this from one specific view. And again, I'm using my silhouette of my shoulder here to kind of help me out with the overall placement. Now, sometimes your clavicle bone is actually going to be rather embedded into, it kind of seems like the character's chest here. So I'm actually just bringing the size of this down just a little bit more. And you can see how the clavicle is then going to work into our bicep. So I'm now just kind of blocking in the overall position of my bicep. And again, with the actual biped itself, there's only so much we can do to kind of tweaking some of these joints. So I am going to have to kind of go back and forth between my clavicle bone, my bicep bone, my forearm, kind of just find an average point between all of these different bones, right? So that way I can have the bones kind of flow as nicely as possible through the arm, right? So you can kind of see my wrist is a little bit off center, so I'm just moving that up a little bit. But again, that's going to push my forearm off a little bit. So again, it is a little bit more of kind of like going back and forth and just trying to find something that works best for your specific character. That might mean going, slightly going against the silhouette theory I was just talking about. So you can see I'm getting a little bit more of like a straight arm here. And like we did with our thighs, really ultimately we're looking for these 50% edge loops. Again, your elbow is essentially the same thing as a knee, right? So you can even envision this as your thigh and your calf. It's literally the same thing, right? It's literally exactly the same thing. So we can approach it literally the same way, right? We're going to have an edge loop kind of going through the middle of the elbow. That's going to act as our 50% edge loop. So that's going to be the meeting point of those two bones. As I get down onto the hand, again, we want to try our best to try and center the wrist to the geometry. I'm also going to bring my hand bone, just kind of bring down the overall scaling here quite a bit. And as I start to bring this down, I start to think about, okay, is there any sort of like twisting on the arm here, where you can see as we kind of go down to some of these different views, I might want to just spend a little bit more time kind of polishing off my arm first before I start going into those fingers. Alright, so when we're looking at skinning the fingers of a character, again, topology is really important. We need to kind of understand what topology we're currently working with, how many bones we're working with, and how we actually want to approach blocking in those bones. A character like this, again, is very primitive, so ultimately I just want to choose where the knuckles might be. So for instance, where this edge loop, where we have like the actual fingers extruding off the palm itself, that's where I can maybe have the beginning of my finger bones, and we can even block this in as, like, say, bone 1, bone 2, bone 3, and then I can just follow that same geometry in the paddle finger area here, as well as the thumb, right? We can try and figure something out with the thumb. So I'm just going to take my thumb bone and just kind of place it over here for now, out of the way, and we'll start with our index finger. And I'm just going to simply move this over. First thing we'll do, just bring down the overall size just a little bit. I'm going to grab the base finger. Again, just trying to rotate this into place. Again, I'm doing this a little bit quicker than I typically would. Again, I'm looking at the overall orientation of the bones. Making sure that the bones are actually, rather centered to the geometry. And you can see I'm just going to start working my way down here, mainly using my FK controls, right? So like my rotation controls here, just kind of getting that placed. And paddle finger will do the same thing, except I'll actually just kind of scale out the width just a little bit, maybe squish it down a touch, move it down. It's really important with fingers. You typically want to follow the same topology all the way throughout all the fingers, so that way the bending makes sense. You don't want to have all your bending kind of, construed. And just kind of bring this down. So effectively, the way this would be textured, right, is on that paddle finger, you would actually paint on, 4 fingers, or 3 fingers rather. This, of course, is not a character that you would use for, let's say, extreme close-ups of fingers wrapping around something. This character just doesn't have that capability. Again, this is catered to something a little bit more in the mobile realms of things. So again, just trying to get this roughly placed in. Again, I'm doing this rather quick here, so we'll say that's fine. The thumb I'm not really going to do for this demo here. Again, ultimately, the thumb, we're just kind of following the same topology. So once I'm happy with my overall arm placement, I'm then going to go ahead and simply double click on the clavicle. And I'm going to do a copy paste here, right? Just to simply copy that over to the opposite side. Now that I have all of my bones placed, except for the thumb, again, I'm not going to do that. But once I have all of my bones placed, then I can go ahead and I can apply my skin modifier. So I'm actually going to do the thumb real quick here. I'm just going to shut this off for a second. And then once we get back going again, I will have the thumb placed, and I'll just do the skin modifier review as well as a voxel solve. Got all my bones placed, right? I'm happy with all of them. So what's the next step? Well, the next step is applying a skin modifier onto our character's geometry. And this skin modifier is what's actually going to bind the geometry to the bones themselves. Now, I want to make sure you are aware of a couple different things we need to do first. So sometimes when you model a character, you need to do something called resetting an X form. And technically, really what that means in the most simplistic ways of explaining it, resetting the X form is just telling 3dsMax that this is the correct orientation of my character. This is a big deal when it comes into importing into game engines. Sometimes you can run into issues if you don't reset that X form, or if you are using mirror parameters with your skin modifier. If you don't reset your X form, sometimes those mirror parameters are not available to you. So in order for you to do this, we're going to go to the Utilities tab, top right hand corner. I have my geometry selected. I'm clicking on Reset X Form, then clicking on Reset Selected once, and then clicking on Reset X Form again to turn it off. And what we've done here, if we go back to our Modify tab, is we've actually applied an X Form modifier onto the stack here. Now, I actually had a skin modifier already applied. I don't want to have that, right? I only want to have X Form and Editable Poly. You do not work with the X Form modifier on the stack here. We always want to make sure we collapse this down, right? We're just simply embedding that into the Edit Poly geometry. So now that we've done that, we're now going to apply a skin modifier. So we're going into our modifier list and just simply typing in the word skin. Once we apply the skin modifier, we're then coming on down to where we have our bones here, because we need to stipulate what bones are being added into the modifier itself. So I'm just going to go ahead and pull down this Select Bones window. Inside the Select Bones window, I'm going to go up to Display and hit Expand All, so that way I have all the different biped bones available to me. And we want to select all of these bones except for the bip. And sometimes you're going to have the footsteps bone available to you as well. We do not want footsteps. We do not want bip. We want to have all the other bones though. So I'm simply clicking on my pelvis. I'm going down to the bottom of my list. I'm going to hold Shift and then click on that last bone to select everything and then hit Select, right? So we've loaded all of those into the skin modifier. So at this point, if you were to actually grab a bone, you will have deforming. It'll be really bad, but you can see those vertices now are being assigned to different bones. So what I typically do at this point is I run a kind of like an auto skinning process here, which is never amazing, but again, what it's going to do is it's going to kind of get you to a certain point a little bit faster, right? It's going to kind of take care of some like the really messiness that might exist. You hope that it does. Again, sometimes it doesn't because it's an automated process. However, sometimes it does help. So I'm going to go ahead. We're scrolling down inside our skin modifier. We're looking for our weight properties here. We have a weight solver. There's two different types. There's voxel and there's heat map. I typically use voxel. I'm going to click on the little settings button just to the right of the word voxel. That brings up this little window here where you have fall off, max influence, and max resolution. Fall off has to do with the overall spread of the fall off here, so you can even take your cursor and hover over top of all of these words. It'll give you a little blurb to kind of tell you what they're doing. So typically low poly characters, I like to bring this up rather high. So I'm going to do about 0.8. Max influence is how many bones can influence one specific vertex. Again, lower poly characters, I like to keep this around 2. Even more high poly characters, I'll keep this at 2. Max resolution, I'm just going to simply make this 512. This is ultimately creating a shell of your character. If you make it 1024, that shell of your character that's using this calculation, or doing the calculation, it will be a little bit more accurate to your character. I find there's minimal differences between 512 and 1024. So I'm going to go ahead and hit apply. You're going to see down bottom left hand corner, it's going to just simply read out computing geodesic distances. Typically it's a very fast process. So at this point now, if I go ahead and just simply grab one of my legs, you can see again the skinning is not great. Right, skinning is not great. However, it is rather cleaned up for us a little bit here. Right, so that's your very basics on the biped, how to place the biped or create one, how to place one, how to modify it, and how to apply a skin modifier to your character.